Oh yeah, baby, we're back again for yet another Best Games list, and this time we're headed all the way back to 1995. It was the year where Brad Pitt was the sexiest man alive, according to People magazine. Coolio invited us to join him in his gangster's paradise, and a website called Amazon.com sold their first book. That'll never catch on. However, whilst the rest of the world was watching Toy Story and doing the Macarena, we were sat in front of our SNESes and Sega Saturns, enjoying a plethora of brilliant video games. And we're here today to reveal the creme de la creme. Before we get into our list though, we must first establish the rules. We've scoured the archives of game rankings to bring you the best reviewed games of 1995, but in order to be counted, a title must have been released in at least one territory in that year and received a minimum of 7 professional reviews. We also don't include collections, ports, or re-releases in our rankings, unless they were different enough from the original to warrant talking about. With all of that nice and clear then, I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are the 10 best games of 1995. Number 10. Virtua Fighter, Sega Saturn, 89.57%. Although fighting fans around the world had been able to experience all the fun that Virtua Fighter had to offer in arcades since 1993, they weren't able to welcome the game into their own homes until 1995. Well, unless they lived in Japan, in which case they'd have gotten it in late 1994, but that's by the by. Virtua Fighter is a notable title for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it kick-started the Virtua Fighter franchise, of course, a series that endures to this day, and secondly, it was the very first arcade game ever to feature fully 3D polygon graphics, which is quite the claim to fame. The game itself saw players facing off against all 8 of the game's characters before taking on Dural, the big boss. Fights were won by either knocking out the opponent, pushing them out of the ring, or simply having more health than they did by the time the match came to an end. Virtua Fighter was undoubtedly one of the best reasons to own a Sega Saturn. It was considered to be a near-perfect port of the arcade original, with critics lauding its graphics, sound, and the variety of characters available to the player. I guess you could say it was virtually flawless. Never mind. Number 9. Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Kong Quest, SNES, 89.81%. Get your bananas at the ready, folks, because we're off to Donkey Kong Country. The sequel to the 1994 platformer, Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Kong Quest, stars Kong's nephew Diddy and his friend Dixie, who must traverse Crocodile Isle in order to rescue the big man himself. Or rather, Big Ape himself. Developed by Rare and published by Nintendo, Diddy's Kong Quest was a game of the 2D side-scrolling platformer variety, and it was up to players to control Diddy, as well as Dixie if they had a friend on hand, across 52 different levels, battling rats, porcupines, bees, and much more as they went along. Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Kong Quest was so popular upon its release that retailers struggled to keep up with customer demand. Despite the original Donkey Kong Country being excellent, Diddy's Kong Quest improved upon it in every way. Not only was it a good bit longer and therefore better value for money, but it was also more graphically impressive, and the gameplay overall was much more fun. By today's standards, Diddy's Kong Quest may not look like much, but at the time, it was really pushing the boundaries of what a video game could actually achieve. Number 8. Seiken Densetsu 3, Super Famicom, 90%. We're paying a visit to our good friends over at Square Enix now, or simply Square as they were known at the time, as we take a look at their Super Famicom follow-up to 1993's Secret of Mana. Released in Japan only in September 1995, Seiken Densetsu 3, or Trials of Mana if you want to get an alternative title about this, is set in a world where mana is an ethereal but finite resource and is beginning to fade. The game follows a group of heroes as they set out to claim the Mana Sword in order to defeat the Benevodons, who will awaken and destroy the world should the Mana Tree die. As the game was exclusive to Japan, many of its English reviews were published years after its initial release, but all were highly complimentary. Though some felt that the combat wasn't as tight as that in Secret of Mana, most agreed that the graphics, soundtrack, and the remainder of the gameplay more than made up for it. A fan translation of Seiken Densetsu 3 was made in 1999, but an official release of the game wouldn't hit Western shores until 2019, some 14 years after the game's original release. It was totally worth the wait though. Number 7. Sega Rally Championship, Sega Saturn, 90%. Get that seatbelt on, dear viewer, because it's time to go fast. Although Sega Rally Championship was released in arcades in 1994, it didn't make its way to the Sega Saturn until the following year. The game itself was pretty standard driving fare. Players entered the World Championship, which consisted of 3 races, and competed against other drivers. If they were in first place by the end of the 3rd race, they'd unlock a bonus 4th track, and if they were able to win that race as well, they'd be awarded a 3rd car. Oh, exciting. The game sold like hotcakes following its release, and delighted both players and critics, who praised the physics of the races, the game's tight controls, and the visuals, which gave a feeling of speed. The title won the Game Fan Racing Game of the Year award, and in 2009 it was declared by Retro Gamer to be the top racing game ever. To us modern racing fans who are used to dozens of tracks and more cars than you could shake a gear stick at, Sega Rally Championship might look a little quaint, but at the time of its release it was cutting-edge stuff and gave players of the 90s all the thrill of rally driving, but in the comfort and safety of their own homes. Number 6. The Beast Within, a Gabriel Knight Mystery, PC 90.5%. Have you got problems with ghosties and ghoulies? Then you need to get in touch with the Schattenjäger known as Gabriel Knight. Are you laughing at the word Schattenjäger? It's not that funny. In his second outing, The Beast Within, a Gabriel Knight Mystery, the titular Gabriel is now living in Rittersberg, Germany. His new book, The Voodoo Murders, is a bestseller, and all is going well. That is, of course, until he gets roped into hunting a werewolf in Munich and becoming a Schattenjäger, which is basically a ghost hunter. We've all been there, right? Throughout the game, players control either Gabriel or his student assistant, Grace, and they must interact with items in each level in order to advance the story and ultimately solve the mystery. The Beast Within was a hit with critics, who praised the game's masterful blend of gameplay and storytelling, as well as the characterization of Grace and the performance of actors Dean Erickson and Joanne Takahashi. Despite being a critical success and winning Computer Gaming World's Game of the Year accolade, not all that many people bought a copy of The Beast Within, and it's considered a commercial failure. If you happen to be feeling a little spooky though, the game is still available and can generally be picked up for about the price of a fancy coffee, so go on, show it some love. Number 5. Panzer Dragoon, Sega Saturn, 90.92%. We turn our attention now to a game that kick-started a franchise, and one that was probably one of the best reasons to own a Sega Saturn. You know, if you could afford one, that is. Developed by Sega's Team Andromeda studio and published by Sega themselves, Panzer Dragoon was the first title in the Panzer Dragoon series, and saw player character Kyle mounting a dragon in order to prevent another from reaching the Black Tower. The game was a rail shooter, and across 6 levels, players were tasked with shooting a variety of enemies, which could be anything from monsters to machines, and taking on a number of bosses. Panzer Dragoon was one of the first titles released for the Saturn, and as such, it was highly anticipated. Thankfully, it lived up to everyone's expectations, and although it didn't sell as well as Sega had hoped it would, critics had a lot of praise for everything from its innovative gameplay to its stunning visuals. The title won Electronic Gaming Monthly's Best Saturn Game of 1995, and received a remake in 2020, though by all accounts the remake isn't very good, so best to stick with the original if you're going to seek it out. Number 4. NHL 96, Sega Genesis, 92.5%. Oh yeah, here we go, Ben's catchphrase time! It's been a little while since we've seen a sporty title on one of these lists, and oh boy, or girl, are we pleased to see them make a return. Gosh, that actually sounded like I meant it, didn't it? Jeez. puck-based offering, NHL 96, was developed by High Score Productions and published by EA Sports, boo, hiss, and put players in control of little digital hockey teams, either real-life ones from the 1994-95 season or custom ones. Like in real-life ice hockey, the aim of the game was to score as many goals as possible within the time limit and without committing fouls, lest ye be sentenced to a stint in the penalty box. Upon its release in October 1995, NHL 96 received critical acclaim, and is still considered to be the best installment in the NHL video game series. Critics praised the improved AI, more detailed graphics, new ways to score, and the game's more complex fighting mechanics. Yes, that's right, true to form with ice hockey, this game features fighting mechanics. Quite an apt sport to turn into a video game, in fact, given that it's about 50% Mortal Kombat. Number 3. Warcraft 2 Tides of Darkness, PC, 94.75%. Another year, another Blizzard game making it into one of these best of lists. It's a shame they mostly haven't been able to replicate their success of the 90s and 2000s lately, as we players are getting a bit tired of all the Diablo Immortals and Overwatch 2s. Alas, it's nice to look back on a time when Blizzard was famous for quality video games and not constant controversy. Originally released in 1995 for PC before making its way to the Sega Saturn and PlayStation in 1997, Warcraft 2 Tides of Darkness was a follow-up to 1994's Warcraft Orcs and Humans. The game was of the real-time strategy persuasion, and saw players taking control of either the human inhabitants of Lordaeron and their allies, or the invading orcs. As with other RTS titles, it was up to players to gather resources and use them to produce buildings and units in order to defeat their opponents. Warcraft 2 went down a treat with critics, many of whom said it was an improvement over its predecessor. In particular, they highlighted the superior AI, the multitudes of strategic possibilities, and the addictive gameplay as reasons that every RTS fan should own a copy of this game. Number 2. Chrono Trigger, SNES, 95.64%. Well, would you look who it is, our pals at Square back with another smashing RPG. They must have been very busy boys, girls, and others in 1995. I sure hope they took a well-earned holiday in 96. They definitely earned it. Created by a group of developers dubbed the Dream Team by Square, Chrono Trigger was originally released in Japan in March 1995 for the SNES, before making its way to North America later in the year. This RPG follows the eponymous Chrono as he and his allies attempt to put a stop to Lavos, a creature set to appear in the year 1999 AD that will wipe out civilization as they know it. Critics lavished Chrono Trigger with praise, comparing it favourably with the likes of Final Fantasy and The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. In particular, they lauded the varied gameplay, the game's humour, and the combat, which many found to be much simpler than in most RPGs of the time, therefore making the game far more accessible to a much wider audience. Chrono Trigger went on to sell millions of copies, earn a handful of rewards, and these days is considered to be one of the best games ever made. And number 1, Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island, SNES, 96%. Yet again, we find ourselves rounding off one of these lists with a Mario title. You might think we'd be bored of them by now, but we're just pleased that our favourite mustachioed Italian plumber and all of his adorable pals have enjoyed so much success over the years. Released all around the world for the SNES between August and December 1995, Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island put players in control of friendly green dinosaur Yoshi, who embarks on the quest to reunite baby Mario with Luigi after the latter is kidnapped. Critics had a lot of love for Yoshi's Island, calling it things like, quote, possibly the best platform game of all time, and, quote, one of the handful of truly perfect games ever produced. The visuals were stunning, the gameplay was innovative and engrossing, and on a technical level, the game was pretty much flawless. In fact, just about the only complaint that anyone had about Yoshi's Island was that baby Mario's cry UI was so gosh darned annoying, and in fairness it was bloody irritating, but thankfully that wasn't enough to put people off the game. So once again, well done to you, Mario and chums, for reaching the top of another one of these lists. See you on the next one, probably.